The air in Ecliptica was as stale as a politician's promise, which suited Taran Drex just fine. She preferred it over the sickly sweet aroma of optimism. Optimism got you killed, or, at the very least, broke your heart and emptied your pockets. Taran adjusted her goggles, squinting into the flickering light of the jury-rigged control panel. The guts of the asteroid city were a mess of wires and pipes, a chaotic orchestra of electrical hums and mechanical groans that somehow always kept the place running. "Pass me the wrench, Nod," she said, her voice echoing in the cramped space. Nod, bless his cloned little heart, was in the middle of a staring contest with the universe, or perhaps just the wall. With a blink that suggested deep thought rather than absent-mindedness, he handed her the wrench. "Here you go, Taran. You know, I read somewhere that meditation can improve focus. Is that what you were doing? I thought you were just slacking off," Taran snorted. "Meditation, huh? Maybe that's why you're so blissfully unaware of how crappy everything is." Nod grinned. "Ignorance is bliss, my friend. And I've got a lifetime supply." While Nod might have been grown in a vat, he had quirks no scientist could engineer, like his fascination with archaic human practices and his inexplicable love for making breakfast. Taran sometimes wondered if they mixed up the genetic cocktail and added a pinch of eccentricity. The lights flickered again, as if the city itself was trying to blink away the absurdity of their existence. It was hard to believe that Ecliptica was once a bustling hub of trade and innovation. Now it was more like the universe's forgotten sock drawer. "You think the power's gonna last the night?" Nod asked, nudging a cable with the toe of his boot. "If we're lucky. If not, we'll have a romantic evening by candlelight," Taran replied, tightening a bolt. "Though I think we've got a better chance of seeing a unicorn." Their banter was interrupted by a sharp beep from Taran's communicator. She groaned. "What now? If it's another maintenance request, It's the council," Nod interrupted, reading over her shoulder. "Meeting in 15, something about an alien envoy." "Aliens? Fantastic. Maybe they've come to admire our advanced technology," Taran said, waving at the cobbled-together mess around them. 15 minutes later, they found themselves in the council chamber, which had all the charm of a budget-class waiting room. The council members were a mix of tired elders and disgruntled middle-agers, all looking distinctly unimpressed. At the center of the room stood the alien envoy, a creature resembling a cross between a jellyfish and a cactus, a geltus if you wanted to make a bad joke, and Taran did. "Ladies and gentlemen," the envoy began in a voice that sounded like a blender full of gravel, "we come to discuss a grave matter." "If it's about the vending machines not working, I'm on it," Taran quipped, earning a few chuckles. The envoy's appendages twitched, possibly a frown in Gelta speak. "It concerns your cloning practices." Taran raised an eyebrow. "What's wrong with a few spare parts walking around? Nod's harmless. The Galactic Order views uncontrolled human cloning as a threat." Nod leaned over to Taran and whispered, "Guess we're not so harmless after all." "Oh, please. We barely have enough resources to keep the lights on, let alone start a galactic takeover," Taran said, rolling her eyes. "What's next? They gonna ban us from eating our rations with our left hand?" The envoy ignored her. "Should you refuse to cease, there will be consequences." Taran crossed her arms. "Consequences, huh? What are you gonna do, cut off our supply of bad news and dashed hopes?" The room was silent, the kind of silence that usually precedes an explosion or an awkward compliment. "We will give you time to consider," the envoy said, jiggling menacingly before floating out of the room. "Well, that was fun," Nod said, rubbing his hands together. "What now?" "Now," Taran sighed, "we do what we always do. We survive. And maybe, just maybe, we figure out how to make their lives as miserable as yours." They left the council chamber, Taran's mind swirling with sarcastic comments and half-baked plans. The corridors of Ecliptica were like the veins of a tired beast, pulsing with the life of its battered inhabitants. As they walked, she couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. "You think we can convince them Nod's just my oversized pet?" she asked, nudging him playfully. "I do a good impression of a Labrador," Nod replied, wagging his imaginary tail. But their laughter faded into the background hum of the city, where the real challenge lay in doing what humans did best, muddling through the mess they'd made, with a smile and a middle finger to the universe. Taran and Nod walked the creaky metal veins of Ecliptica, their footsteps echoing like a metronome ticking down to some inevitable disaster. The council meeting had been a real page-turner, if your idea of fun was watching paint dry while an alien jellyfish blamed you for the human condition. So, what do you make of these alien fun police? Nod asked, breaking the clanging rhythm of their walk. Taran shrugged, the universal sign for I can't be bothered to care, but let's pretend. They're worried about clones being unpredictable. All it takes is one bad day, and suddenly we're a threat to galactic stability. Maybe they're just bored, right? Because nothing says interstellar leisure activity like micromanaging asteroid cities, Nod replied, rolling his eyes back as if searching for a brain cell that agreed. Exactly. And since we're apparently sitting on the universe's newest tinderbox, they figure they'll do us a favor and babysit, Taran said, her voice laced with sarcasm sharp enough to cut through the stale air. They rounded a corner, the dimly lit corridor leading to their makeshift control room. The place practically glowed with the kind of cobbled-up charm you'd find in a hoarder's paradise. Wires hung from the ceiling like misplaced Christmas lights, blinking occasionally as if trying to send out an SOS. Nod paused at the doorframe, scratching his chin thoughtfully. You think there's more to it? I mean, aliens have a galaxy full of options. Why bother with us unless they're playing a bigger game? Of course, there's more to it, Taran replied, stepping over a particularly suspicious puddle of oil. Aliens don't barge in for no reason. They've probably noticed that the universe doesn't grind to a halt just because of us, and they don't like it, like Cosmic Karen demanding to speak to the manager of the universe, Nod muttered, opening a panel to check the status of their beleaguered power grid. Taran grinned, adjusting her goggles again. Exactly. And now we've got to figure out if we can punt them back into the void without making Ecliptica implode. Nod snorted, gesturing to the chaotic tangle of their control panel. Yeah, well, judging by this, I'd say we've got a 50-50 shot. Either they back off or we end up as a quirky footnote in some alien scrapbook, more like a cautionary tale, Taran replied. She looked at the mess of circuits like a mechanic eyeing a particularly stubborn engine. Speaking of footnotes, let's check if our glorious leaders have managed to confuse their elbows with their policies. They flicked on the terminal, its worn screen flickering to life with all the enthusiasm of a dozing cat. The Council's latest attempts at diplomacy appeared, full of the usual buzzwords that made Taran's eyes roll faster than a dice in a rigged game. Look at this, she said, pointing to a particularly nauseating section. They're suggesting we negotiate peaceful integration with our new alien overlords. As if we're just gonna hold hands and sing Interstellar Cumbia. Right, because nothing says we come in peace like threatening our entire cloning operation, Nod said, shaking his head. If they're so worried about our unpredictability, maybe they should take a look at their own strategy. Maybe they're just bad at first impressions. Like, really bad, Taran deadpanned, clicking through the rest of the message. But seriously, we need to figure out what these Geltis are really after. Nod leaned back against the panel, crossing his arms. You think it's about the clones, or is it something else? Taran sighed, the weight of too many long nights on her shoulders. I think they're scared. Not of us, but of what we represent. Human adaptability, survival, the ability to thrive in any corner of this screwed-up universe. Even if we do it with all the grace of a drunk skunk, Nod added with a grin. Exactly. We're like cockroaches with opposable thumbs and a penchant for making terrible decisions. And that scares them because it makes us unpredictable, Taran said, eyes narrowing in thought. They can't predict us, so they want to control us. The console beeped, interrupting their dark musings with a data alert. Taran pulled up the information, her eyebrows arching in surprise. Well, look at that. We've got some new visitors on the perimeter, and they're not sending flowers. Nod leaned over to peer at the screen. That's a lot of ships for a friendly chat. More like they're planning a surprise party with explosive favors. Looks like we're not the only ones who've got an eye on Ecliptica, Taran muttered. We better gear up. Just in case their version of diplomacy involves plasma cannons. Never a dull moment, is there? Nod asked, already moving toward the storage lockers for their gear. Taran chuckled, though it held little humor. We're living in a universe that sees us as the punchline to its favorite joke. Better keep up if we don't want to be left behind. They suited up in silence, the weight of their thoughts settling over them like a second skin. Taran checked her blaster, a clunky but reliable piece of tech that had seen more action than she cared to remember. Nod, meanwhile, picked up a toolkit, the universal sign that he was ready to fix whatever mess they stumbled into. Ready to go play nice? Taran asked, her voice a shade lighter than her mood. As ready as I'll ever be to meet our new pen pals, Nod replied, straightening his jacket. They left the control room, stepping back into the chaotic veins of Ecliptica. The corridors seemed narrower somehow, pressing in on them with the weight of impending decisions. Taran and Nod made their way to the docks, where the alien ships hovered like sharks circling a wounded seal. The sight of them reminded Taran of a bad date, one that leaves you with a lighter wallet and a headache the size of a small moon. Think they're here to apologize for the misunderstanding? Nod asked, peering out at the ships through the grimy viewing port. Oh sure, Taran replied, sarcasm dripping from her words like oil from a leaky engine. And maybe offer us a nice fruit basket. The airlock cycled open with a groan that sounded suspiciously like a complaint. Taran stepped through first, her blaster held casually at her side but ready for action. Nod followed, his toolkit clinking with every step. The alien party awaiting them was a motley crew, all sharp angles and unsettling grace. Their leader, a creature with eyes like burning coals and a smile that screamed, "Trust me, I'm a professional," stepped forward. "Welcome, humans," it purred in a tone that suggested they were anything but. "We have much to discuss." "Yeah," Taran replied, matching its insincerity with aplomb. "Like why you're parked on our front lawn without an invite." The alien's smile widened, though it looked more like a grimace. "We merely wish to ensure the safety of this sector. And by safety, you mean your version of it," Nod added, not bothering to hide his skepticism. The alien's eyes flicked to him, a brief flash of irritation crossing its features. "We have concerns about the instability of your cloning practices. They pose a threat to the order we seek to maintain." Taran snorted, crossing her arms. "Order? All I see is a bully trying to shove us around." The alien's smile thinned, its temper fraying at the edges. "We are not here to bully. We are here to preserve peace." "Funny, because peace looks an awful lot like an invasion from where I'm standing," Taran shot back. The alien's composure cracked, its voice dropping to a menacing growl. "You will cease your cloning, or we will be forced to take action yet. And what about the folks who need those clones to survive?" Taran challenged, her eyes locked on the alien's. "That is not our concern," the alien replied coldly. "Comply or face the consequences." The threat hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. For a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which way the scales would tip. Taran stared at the alien, her mind racing. She knew the odds were stacked against them, but she'd be damned if she let anyone dictate how they lived, or died, on this hunk of rock. "You know what?" Taran said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "We'll think about it." The alien opened its mouth to protest, but Taran waved a hand dismissively. "And while we're thinking, why don't you take your ships for a joyride around the asteroid belt? Give us some space to breathe." The alien hesitated, caught off guard by her audacity. But after a moment it nodded, clearly deciding that discretion was the better part of valor. "Very well. We will allow you time to consider." Taran watched as the alien delegation retreated, the tension in her shoulders easing ever so slightly. It wasn't a victory, but it was a reprieve. "Well, that went about as well as a root canal," Nod said, once the aliens were safely out of earshot. Could have been worse, Taran replied, holstering her blaster. At least we're still in one piece, for now, Nod reminded her. But we've got to figure out what they are really after or we're toast. Yeah, Taran agreed, her mind already turning over the possibilities. And we've got to do it fast. Before they decide we're not worth the trouble, they turn back towards the heart of Ecliptica, their thoughts heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. The universe might be a harsh mistress, but Taran Drex wasn't about to let it dictate her fate, not without a fight. The universe had a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. One minute you're trying to outsmart a council that functions with all the grace of a headless chicken, and the next, you're staring down an alien armada that seems determined to critique your lifestyle choices. Taran Drex was used to dodging cosmic bricks, but this was pushing it. Back in the winding metal guts of Ecliptica, Taran and Nod were doing what any sensible folks would, ignoring the council and following their own noses. The council had all the backbone of a jellyfish, but that was fine. Taran liked jelly, just not in her decision-making. So, what do you reckon they're really up to? Nod asked, his voice bouncing off the walls of the corridor like a voice-activated echo chamber. If I had to guess, they're either planning to catalog us like a rare insect collection or they've developed an unhealthy obsession with our questionable charm, Taran replied, dodging a low-hanging pipe that seemed to have it out for her forehead. Either way, we need answers. And maybe a helmet, Nod grinned, adjusting his toolkit. Let's hope it's not a long-term commitment. I'm terrible with anniversaries. They made their way through the dimly lit corridors, nodding at the occasional fellow resident, who seemed more interested in their own problems than the impending alien conundrum. After all, living on an asteroid came with its own set of existential crises, like the eternal question of whether the reactor would hold out long enough for you to finish your morning coffee. Their destination was one of the less visited corners of Ecliptica, an area that even the cleaning droids seemed to avoid, probably because it was haunted by the specter of bad decisions and worse wiring. Perfect place for alien spies to set up shop, out of sight, out of mind, and out of reach until someone like Taran got curious. As they approached the maintenance hatch that led to the lower levels, Taran gave Nod a sidelong look. Sure you're ready for this? Last chance to back out and pretend you're just another innocent bystander, Nod snorted. Innocent? Haven't been called that since. Well, ever. Besides, I'd hate to miss the alien edition of hide and seek. The hatch creaked open, revealing a ladder that descended into the shadows below. Taran started down first, her boots clanging against the rungs. Last one to find alien tech buys the drinks. Deal, Nod replied, following her down. But I'm ordering something expensive. The lower levels of Ecliptica were a tangle of pipes and conduits, a maze that only the desperate or the deranged dared to navigate. Taran liked to think she was a bit of both. As they moved through the dimly lit corridors, the air grew cooler, the hum of machinery a constant companion. Charming place, Nod said, glancing around. You really know how to pick him, thanks, Taran replied dryly. I've got a knack for finding the best spots to get mugged. They moved deeper into the labyrinth, guided more by instinct than anything else. The further they went, the more out of place things began to feel. It was like walking into a room and realizing all the furniture had been shifted an inch to the left, subtle but unmistakably wrong. Finally, they reached a section of wall that seemed off. Taran knelt, running her fingers along the panels. Here we go. This wasn't here last month. Nod crouched beside her, a frown creasing his brow. Alien handiwork, either that, or the rats have been taking night classes in structural engineering. Taran fiddled with the panel, prying it open to reveal a mess of wires and a device that hummed with an unsettling glow. Bingo! The thing looked like someone had tried to build a radio out of the universe's worst hangover. Wires snaked between unfamiliar components, and a small screen blinked with unreadable characters. Looks friendly, Nod commented, peering over her shoulder. Like a rabid porcupine, Taran agreed. She reached for her toolkit, pulling out a small scanner. Let's see if we can figure out what it's doing. The scanner beeped and whirred, throwing data onto its screen. Taran studied it, eyebrows knitting together. Looks like they're monitoring the entire city. Every conversation, every movement. They've got eyes on us everywhere. Well, that's comforting, Nod said, sarcasm practically dripping from his words. I always wanted to be the star of my own reality show. Taran grunted, trying not to let her unease show. Reality show with an audience that's probably rooting for our untimely demise. Why are they so interested in us anyway? Nod asked, scratching his head. We're not exactly prime real estate. That's the million-credit question, Taran replied, disconnecting a few wires from the device with more confidence than she felt. My guess? They're worried about what we might become, or maybe they just want to know what's so special about this rock, Nod chuckled. Maybe they just really like rocks. Maybe, Taran said, though she didn't believe it for a second. But whatever the reason, we need to get this data back to Ecliptica's leaders. They need to know what we're up against. Yeah, because they've been so competent so far, Nod said, though he was already pulling out a data pad to record their findings. But sure, let's see what the illustrious council has to say about this. With the evidence in hand, they retraced their steps back through the corridors, the tension between them now threaded with a grim determination. Taran's mind was already racing ahead, trying to anticipate the council's reaction and planning how she could keep them from tripping over their own shoelaces. They reached the council chamber, a room that always smelled faintly of desperation and burnt coffee. Inside, the council members sat around a table that had seen too many heated arguments and too few decisive actions. Taran, Nod, began Councillor Fletch, a man with the charisma of a withered cabbage. What brings you here? Taran dropped the data pad onto the table with a satisfying thunk. We've got a problem. One that's a bit more pressing than your usual squabbles over resource allocation. Fletch looked at the data pad like it had just insulted his favorite pet. And what, precisely, is this? Alien surveillance, Nod said, leaning against the wall with a casual air that did little to hide his disdain. They're watching everything. You, me, the poor sap who cleans the toilets, everyone. The councillors exchanged uneasy glances and Fletch cleared his throat. Surely there must be some mistake. Our security systems are about as useful as a chocolate teapot, Taran interrupted, crossing her arms. They are in our systems, councillor. This isn't some paranoia-fueled fantasy. It's happening. Fletch's face turned an interesting shade of puce. We must deliberate on this matter, deliberate. Taran cut in, her patience thinner than a sheet of graphene. Councillor, while you're deliberating, they are listening. We need action, not more endless debates. Indeed, Nod chimed in. Before they decide to do more than just listen. The council muttered amongst themselves, each trying to outmumble the other. It was the kind of display that made Taran want to beat her head against a wall, or maybe theirs. What do you propose we do? Another council member asked, her voice quivering with the kind of faux concern that made Taran's skin crawl. First, we need to shut down their equipment, Taran said, keeping her voice steady. Then, we need to figure out why they're so interested in us. Until we know that, we're stuck playing defense. Fletch nodded slowly, though he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Very well. We shall authorize a task force to address this issue. Generous of you, Taran said, her voice dripping with irony, but make it quick. We don't have the luxury of time. With that, she turned on her heel and strode from the room, Nod following closely behind. Once outside, he let out a low whistle. Think they'll actually do something for once, honestly? Taran replied, her eyes scanning the hallway as if expecting the walls to start whispering. I doubt it. But at least we've got a head start. They walked in silence for a moment, the weight of their discovery settling over them like a leaden shroud. So, what's next? Nod asked, breaking the silence. We keep digging, Taran said, determination flaring in her chest. And we prepare for the worst. Sounds like a plan, Nod agreed, a glint of mischief in his eyes. I'm ready for whatever they throw at us. That was the thing about living on Ecliptica. You learn to roll with the punches, even when those punches were aimed by beings who considered humanity a bug to be squashed. Taran didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going down without a fight. Because in a universe that saw them as a punchline, sometimes the only thing you could do was laugh and keep swinging. The aliens were losing their cool. You could tell because the usually stoic envoy, a gangly creature with too many limbs and too little patience, was pacing the council chamber like it was trying to wear a groove into the floor. The council members were watching the display with the kind of slack-jawed fascination that made you wonder how they managed to tie their shoelaces in the morning. Taran leaned against the wall, arms crossed, doing her best to look unimpressed by the creature's increasingly erratic behavior. Beside her, Nod was fiddling with his toolkit, an expression of exaggerated calm on his face. "Think it's having a midlife crisis," Nod murmured, keeping his voice low enough so only Taran could hear. "Either that or it's realized it's stuck with us for the foreseeable future," Taran replied, a smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I'd be twitchy too." The alien paused in its pacing to glare at them, its eyes narrowing in what might have been a calculating look, though with aliens who really knew. It spoke, its voice a series of clicks and hisses that the council's translation unit struggled to keep up with. Human behavior, unpredictable, troubling, the translation unit spat out in a stilted monotone, as if it too was fed up with the day's nonsense. "Well, that's humanity for you," Taran called out, flashing a grin that was all teeth. "We aim to perplex." The alien's eyes narrowed further, if that was even possible, and the counselors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Taran could practically smell the fear emanating from them, the kind of fear that came from realizing you'd invited a bear to dinner and forgotten the honey. Counselor Fletch, looking more like a wilted lettuce with every passing moment, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could come to some understanding," he suggested weakly. The alien resumed its pacing, its frustration palpable even without the benefit of a facial expression. Taran exchanged a glance with Nod, who raised an eyebrow and gave a barely perceptible nod. It was time to shake things up a bit. Stepping forward, Taran put on her best diplomatic smile, one that usually sent people running in the opposite direction. "So what's it going to take to get you to stop using us like a particularly dull soap opera? We offer pretty terrible reruns." The alien paused, regarding her with a mixture of curiosity and irritation. "Your unpredictability, dangerous, must be contained." "Contain us," Nod said, chuckling under his breath. "Good luck with that. We're like a bad hangover, persistent and impossible to ignore." Taran shot him a look that was part approval, part warning. Nod might be a wild card, but he was her wild card, and she needed him to stay on point. "Maybe we can come to an agreement," she suggested, turning back to the alien. "You stop snooping on us and we stop being so erratic." The alien considered her proposal, its silence stretching out long enough to make even the dust motes nervous. Finally, it spoke again. "Trust, difficult, your kind. Unpredictable. Trust," Nod scoffed. "From where I'm standing, you've been about as trustworthy as a politician at a truth convention." A ripple of unease spread through the council at Nod's words, but Taran held her ground. They needed the council to see the alien's vulnerability, to understand that unpredictability was their secret weapon. "Look," Taran said, her tone as reasonable as she could make it without choking on her own sarcasm. "You want us to be predictable. That's not going to happen. But maybe you could learn something from it." The alien tilted its head, considering, and Taran could almost see the gears turning, or whatever passed for gears in an alien's mind. It was a gamble, but one she was willing to take. "Let us prove it," she pressed. "Give us a chance to work together on our terms." The alien hesitated, its many limbs twitching in time with whatever internal debate it was having. Finally, it nodded, a small gesture but one that carried the weight of interstellar bureaucracy. "Terms, acceptable for now." Taran let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Great, let's get to work then." As they left the council chamber, Nod fell into step beside her. "That went well," Taran snorted, "as well as a blindfolded dance on a minefield. But it's a start." So what's the plan, oh fearless leader? She'd been mulling it over ever since they'd discovered the surveillance devices, the pieces of a plan slowly coming together in her mind. We need to use what they've overlooked, us. Nod's brow furrowed. Pretty sure they're not overlooking us. We're the main attraction. Taryn shook her head. No, not us specifically. Human unpredictability. They can't handle it right. So let's give them a real show. A grin spread across Nod's face, a devil-may-care expression that was as familiar as it was reassuring. That I can do, what's the angle? We need to fry their circuits without them realizing what's happening. You can handle unpredictable, right? Nod made a show of checking his toolkit. I've got a PhD in unpredictable. Good, Taryn said, her voice steely with determination. Let's make them regret ever thinking they could control us. The plan, as it turned out, was as cobbled together as a patchwork quilt on fire. But sometimes, chaos was the best tool in the arsenal. They needed to be loud, messy, and as distracting as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Their first target was the control center hidden beneath the city, a sprawling tangle of wires and blinking lights that was as inviting as a pit of snakes. Taryn and Nod navigated the labyrinth with practiced ease, their movements confident even as the shadows seemed to close in around them. So, how exactly are we doing this? Nod asked, his voice echoing off the walls. We find their central relay and you do your thing, Taryn replied. Make it look like a malfunction, something that'll keep them busy for a while. Nod nodded, his face a mask of concentration. No problem. I'll just rearrange a few wires and let entropy do the rest. They reached the relay panel, a formidable beast of circuitry that hummed with the lifeblood of the alien surveillance system. Taryn watched as Nod knelt, his hands moving with a precision that belied his usual air of nonchalance. How long you think we've got until they notice? Nod asked, glancing up at her as he worked. With any luck, long enough to get a head start, Taryn replied, her eyes scanning the corridor for any sign of unwanted visitors. But let's not stick around to find out. Nod chuckled, a sound that was more nerves than humor. You make it sound so easy. That's my job, Taryn said, unable to keep the grin from her face. Just keep doing yours. Minutes ticked by as Nod worked, the air heavy with the smell of ozone and the distant rumble of machinery. Taryn felt a prickle of unease at the back of her neck, a reminder that their little stunt was as likely to backfire as it was to succeed. Finally, Nod sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on his trousers. Done. Now we run like hell. Like hell's got a coupon for free ice water, Taryn agreed, already moving back the way they'd come. They navigated the maze with the ease of long practice, the thrum of adrenaline pushing them onward. Every step took them closer to safety, to the chance to regroup and plan their next move. As they reached the ladder leading up to the main levels, Taryn paused, glancing back at Nod. Think they'll buy it? Nod shrugged, a wry smile on his lips. If they don't, we'll just have to make it up as we go. We're good at that, right? Right, Taryn said, clambering up the ladder with Nod close behind. Once they were back in the familiar confines of Ecliptica's corridors, Taryn allowed herself a moment to breathe, to savor the small victory they'd snatched from the jaws of alien oversight. So, what now? Nod asked, falling into step beside her. Taryn glanced at him, a glint of determination in her eyes. Now we wait and watch, see how they react, and then we figure out our next move. Nod nodded, a grin spreading across his face like sunshine through clouds. Sounds like a plan, and if it all goes sideways, we adapt, Taryn said, her voice steady and sure. We adapt and we fight back. Because in a universe that saw them as little more than a curiosity, sometimes the only way to win was to play by your own rules. And Taryn had every intention of rewriting the book, one unpredictable page at a time. The universe didn't care about your plans, your hopes, or your well-laid schemes. Out here, in the cosmic back alley that was Ecliptica, it was more interested in watching you trip over your own feet while laughing its metaphorical head off. Taryn Drex knew that better than most. If she had a credit for every time the universe had pulled the rug out from under her, She could afford a real job on a planet with rain and trees, and people who didn't have existential crises about reactor reliability. As it was, she stood in the dimly lit control room, watching the alien surveillance relay flicker ominously. Nod's handiwork, chaotic and brilliant as it was, had worked like a charm, more of a curse, really, if you asked most folks. They'd hoped to throw the alien overseers off their game, give humanity some breathing room. Instead, they'd kicked a hornet's nest full of bureaucratic extraterrestrials with too many limbs and too little patience. "Looks like we've got their attention," Taran muttered, eyeing the screens. The alien envoy, all gangly limbs and inscrutable expressions, was back in the council chamber, looking less than pleased. Probably because their latest scheme involved tightening the chokehold on Ecliptica, threatening a full takeover. Yay for unintended consequences. "Attention's one way to put it," Nod replied, deadpan. He was trying to look as relaxed as a man on the executioner's block. "They're about as subtle as a sledgehammer in a china shop." Taran shot him a sardonic grin. "I thought you liked chaos." "Chaos, sure," Nod said, fiddling with his toolkit, a nervous tic he developed somewhere between the fourth and fifth time they'd narrowly avoided death. "But this is more like organized chaos. The kind that comes with rules and regulations and a whole lot of paperwork. Don't forget the part where they're possibly going to vaporize us if we don't fall in line," Taran added, keeping her voice light despite the knot in her stomach. "Sounds like a fun weekend." They watched as the alien envoy barked orders that the translation unit mangled into a stilted monotone. "Ecliptica under control, human interference, unacceptable, unacceptable," Nod echoed, his voice laced with mockery. "Guess they're not fans of our improvisational style." Taran's smirk faded as reality sank in. Their little stunt hadn't gone unnoticed, and now Nod was at risk. The aliens weren't known for their forgiving nature, or any nature that appreciated the human penchant for unpredictability. "They won't take this lying down," Taran said, the resolve hardening in her eyes. "Then maybe we should give them something to sit up and pay attention to," Nod replied, "before they decide to play hardball with our skulls." The decision, when it came, was swift and irrevocable, the kind that left no room for second-guessing. They needed to regroup, find a way to stop the aliens from taking control without tipping their hand too soon. Easier said than done when the stakes were higher than a stone giraffe. But as they slipped through the corridors, the grim reality of their situation settled like a lead weight in Taran's gut. The aliens weren't just tightening their grip, they were preparing to squeeze the life out of Ecliptica and with it any hope of human autonomy. They had to act fast or they'd find themselves decorating the asteroid's surface courtesy of some alien edict. "Think we can pull this off?" Nod asked, casting a sidelong glance at her. "Do we have a choice?" Taran shot back. "For now, we keep moving. We'll find a way to turn this around." Yet as they rounded a corner, Taran's resolve was tested in the worst way possible. A pair of alien enforcers, all wiry limbs and glowing eyes, emerged from the shadows, blocking their path. The odds of a friendly chat were about the same as a snowball's in a supernova. "Oh," Nod muttered, stating the obvious as usual. The aliens wasted no time, moving with a fluidity that belied their gangly appearance. Before Taran could react, they seized Nod, pinning his arms with a practiced efficiency that suggested they'd done this dance a few times before. "Run!" Nod shouted, his voice echoing off the metal walls as he struggled in vain. Taran hesitated, torn between the instinct to help and the knowledge that staying would only get them both captured. The universe, it seemed, wasn't done with its sense of humor. With a curse that would have made the saltiest space pirate blush, she turned and sprinted down the corridor. Her heart pounded in her chest, each step echoing like a drumbeat of impending doom. She couldn't shake the image of Nod's defiant face, nor the hollow feeling of leaving him in the clutches of their alien overlords. But she had to think bigger, beyond the immediate gravity well of her guilt. To save Nod, to save Ecliptica, she needed a plan, and for that she needed to keep her freedom. She reached the safe house, a cramped, nondescript room hidden among the warren of corridors that made up Ecliptica's underbelly. It wasn't much, just a place to regroup and hide when things went south, as they so often did. But it was all she had. Taran took a moment to steady herself, breathing deeply and trying to think past the white-hot anger and fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She still had allies, still had options. The question was, how to use them before the aliens tightened their grip beyond breaking point. She knew one thing for certain. Whatever the plan, it was time to make the aliens regret ever underestimating humanity's capacity for chaos. If they wanted a wild card, she'd give them the whole deck. As she sat there, the weight of the universe pressing down like a cosmic anvil, Taran allowed herself a moment of bitter humor. "Well, universe," she said aloud to the empty room, "if this is your idea of a joke, it's a real knee-slapper." But laughter was a luxury she could ill afford. She had work to do, allies to rally, a friend to save, and a universe to remind that humans were anything but predictable. The first step was reaching out to the other resistance members scattered throughout Ecliptica. Most were just regular folks trying to eke out a living on this rock, and they weren't eager to stick their necks out. But they had a stake in this as much as she did. The aliens weren't offering partnerships. They were offering servitude, and that was something no one here was willing to accept. She tapped into the old communication lines, the ones the aliens hadn't found, or at least hadn't bothered to shut down yet. A few quick messages, coded to look like innocuous correspondence, and she was on her way. She had to move quickly before the aliens started sweeping for collaborators. As she worked, Taran couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her. Paranoia was second nature for anyone living on Ecliptica, but this was different. It was as if the very walls were watching, waiting for her to slip. And maybe they were. After all, the aliens had shown they were more than capable of turning their surveillance apparatus on a dime. Hours passed in a blur of activity. Taran navigated the underground networks, meeting with the resistance members who still dared show their faces. Each meeting was a tense affair, quick exchanges of information and plans whispered in shadows. They'd have to strike soon before the aliens tightened their grip further. The plan that emerged was ambitious, some might say foolhardy, but it was all they had. They'd hit key points of the alien infrastructure, sowing chaos and confusion, buying enough time to wrest control back from their extraterrestrial overlords. And through it all, a single name echoed in Taran's mind: Nod. More than just a friend and ally, he'd been her rock, her partner in crime. She owed it to him to bring him back, to make sure he didn't pay the ultimate price for their gambit. But first they had to weaken the aliens' hold, give themselves room to breathe. As the final pieces of the plan fell into place, Taran felt a grim sense of determination settle over her. This was it, the make or break moment. With a deep breath, she steeled herself for what was to come. The operation began that night, under the cover of Ecliptica's perpetual twilight. Taran moved with purpose, leading a small team through the winding corridors that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Their target, the alien communication hub, a sprawling array of antennae and dishes that dominated the asteroid skyline. The approach was tense, every creak and groan of the structure setting their nerves on edge. Taran cast a quick glance over her shoulder, her gaze meeting those of her team. They were scared, damn right they were, but they were ready. "Remember," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of distant machinery, "stick to the plan. We hit them fast and hard, then fade back into the shadows." The team nodded, resolve etched on their faces. They knew what was at stake. They were gambling not just with their lives, but with the future of humanity on Ecliptica. Taran led the way, her heart pounding a staccato rhythm that matched the urgency of their mission. The alien guards, more of those wiry enforcers, were present, but they'd grown complacent, lulled by their assumed superiority. It was a mistake Taran intended to exploit. With a nod to her team, she signaled the attack. They moved as one, a blur of motion and whispered intent. The first guard went down with barely a sound, a swift strike to the neck sending it crumpling to the ground. The second, alerted by the disturbance, let out a choked gurgle before meeting a similar fate. In moments they were within the complex, the inner sanctum where the alien machinery hummed with a life of its own. Taran could feel its power, a low thrum that vibrated through the floor, resonating in her bones. This was the beating heart of their enemy's operation, and it was hers for the taking. "Time to make some noise," Taran said, a wicked grin spreading across her face. Nod would have loved this, she thought bitterly, as she set to work. The alien systems were advanced, but they had their weaknesses, chinks in the armor that only a human perspective could exploit. She worked quickly, splicing wires and bypassing circuits, sowing chaos in a way only a human could. The effect was immediate. Lights flickered, alarms blared, and the once orderly array of screens descended into a chaotic mess of static and nonsense. It was beautiful in its own way, a symphony of sabotage that brought a smile to Taran's lips. But even as she worked, a nagging doubt wormed its way into her mind. Was this enough? Would it buy them the time they needed, or was it merely a temporary reprieve in the face of an unstoppable force? She didn't have time to dwell on the answer. Just as quickly as they'd arrived, they were gone, slipping away into the shadows as the alien forces scrambled to regain control. The operation was a success, but it was only the beginning. The real fight was still ahead. As they regrouped in the relative safety of the underground network, Taran allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. They'd struck a blow, however small, against their oppressors. It wasn't enough to free Ecliptica, but it was a start. And in the dim light of their hideout, the faces of her team reflected the same grim determination she felt. They were ready to see this through, to fight for their home and their future. For Nod. For Ecliptica. For humanity. The universe might have a twisted sense of humor, but Taran was determined to have the last laugh. Taran sat in the dim glow of the hideout, surrounded by faces both familiar and weary. Each one wore the look of someone who's been punched in the gut by life one too many times and came to like the feeling. Yeah, they were ready for a fight, but even the bravest soldier needs more than bravado when you're playing chess with aliens who have a penchant for flipping the board. "All right, folks," Taran said, crossing her arms and doing her best to look like she had any idea what the hell she was doing. "Here's the deal. We've pissed in the alien soup, but they're still holding the ladle. We need more if we're gonna take this thing all the way." Great, mumbled Riggs, a lanky engineer with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow and an aversion to soap. "I love impossible tasks on no sleep. Next, you gonna ask us to tickle a black hole, maybe later. For now, there's something in the alien network we can use. A little insurance policy, if you will." Taran leaned forward, eyes gleaming with mischief. "Ever heard of the Omega Node?" The room went silent, breaths held like they were trying not to wake a sleeping giant. A whisper of rumors and myths, the Omega Node was like a boogeyman for aliens, an override system capable of shutting down their tech. Problem was, it was supposed to be a fairy tale for disgruntled miners with too much time and alcohol on their hands. "Hold up," interrupted Janice, her eyebrows rising to heights previously uncharted. "Are you telling us we're betting our lives on something that's likely as real as a politician's promise?" "Pretty much," Taran shrugged, "but it's the only card we've got. And if Nod were here, he'd already be ankle-deep in wires trying to make it work. Speaking of," Riggs cut in, "how do you plan on rescuing the genius idiot without getting us all killed?" "By being genius idiots ourselves," Taran replied with a grin that was far more confident than she felt. "We've got one shot at this, and we're going to need help from the most unlikely source." The room collectively held its breath, waiting for the punchline. "Counselor Fletch," Taran announced, enjoying the gasps of disbelief as much as she could given the circumstances. "Fletch, that spineless worm," Janice snorted. He couldn't decide which sock to put on without forming a committee. "Exactly," Taran said, nodding. "He's the perfect cover. No one expects a scheming mind behind that lettuce leaf face. We just need to prod him in the right direction. As plans went, it was somewhere between likely to succeed and suicidal. But then again, those lines blurred easily in Ecliptica. The group set about preparing, each task executed with the care of people who knew one wrong move could end with them mopping up alien guts or worse, their own. The next day found Taryn standing outside the council chamber, rehearsing her lines like an actor before opening night. Counselor Fletch waddled in, looking as flustered as ever. Taryn approached, pasting on a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Counselor Fletch, just the man I wanted to see," she said, injecting far more cheer into her voice than she felt. "Taryn, is it? What can I do for you?" His eyes darted nervously, like he was expecting an ambush at any moment. "Let's just say I've got a proposition that'll either save Ecliptica or get us all killed. Either way, it beats sitting around waiting for our alien overlords to decide we're obsolete." Fletch blinked, resembling a fish out of water gasping for intellectual air. I don't follow, don't worry, I'll do the thinking." Taryn leaned in, lowering her voice. "You want to be the hero, the one who saved Ecliptica from the aliens. All you have to do is cover for us while we pull off a little heist right under their bulbous noses." Fletch's eyes widened, and for a moment Taryn thought he might actually faint. But then he surprised her. "What do you need?" he asked, voice far steadier than she'd given him credit for. "Access to the surveillance system. A small window just enough to sneak out some precious cargo." Fletch hesitated but nodded, a decision that probably took all the courage he had left. "I'll see what I can do." "Good man," Taryn said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Welcome to the Resistance." With Fletch on board, the plan kicked into overdrive. The Resistance moved like a well-oiled machine, or as close as you could get with a crew held together by duct tape and desperation. Taryn felt the adrenaline coursing through her veins, nerves jangling like someone had plugged her into the asteroid's power grid. The rescue mission was set for the following night. They'd hit the aliens' detention center, a place rumored to be as impenetrable as a politician's ego. But with Fletch providing cover and a little help from the Omega node, they might just have a chance. As they gathered in the rendezvous point, Taryn took stock of her ragtag team. They were a motley crew, to be sure: engineers, miners, a former librarian who had a penchant for explosives. But they were hers, and damn if they didn't have more guts than half the universe combined. "All right, folks," Taryn said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You know the plan. We go in, get Nod, and get out. If all goes well, the aliens won't even know we were there. Here's hoping," Riggs muttered, checking his gear with the practiced ease of someone who'd rather be anywhere but here. They moved out, slipping through the corridors like shadows in the night. The detention center loomed ahead, a monolithic structure that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Taryn felt a shiver of doubt, but she pushed it aside. There was no room for hesitation now. With Fletch providing a distraction through the surveillance feed, they approached the entrance, hearts pounding like drums in the silence. The guard at the door, one of those wiry aliens with too many limbs and not enough common sense, barely had time to register their presence before he was down, courtesy of Janice's quick reflexes. "Easy peasy," Janice whispered, grinning as they slipped inside. The halls were eerily quiet, the low hum of alien tech the only sound as they moved deeper into the complex. Taryn led the way, guided by the schematics they'd painstakingly pieced together from stolen data. Each step felt like a gamble, and every corner turned was a bet against the odds. They reached the holding cells, a series of reinforced doors humming with energy. Taryn's heart skipped as she checked the panel, fingers dancing over the controls. One wrong move and they'd have a horde of aliens breathing down their necks. "Got it," she breathed as the door slid open, revealing a haggard but very much alive Nod. "Took you long enough," Nod said, flashing a grin that was more cocky than relieved. "Shut up and move," Taryn shot back, unable to hide her own smile. "We've got work to do." With Nod in tow, they retraced their steps, hearts pounding in unison as the tension ratcheted up another notch. It was as if the universe held its breath, waiting for the inevitable shoe to drop. They were almost out when the alarm blared, a deafening klaxon that shattered the silence and set their nerves alight. Taran swore, a stream of curses more colorful than any nebula. "Run!" she shouted, urgency in every syllable. They sprinted for the exit, alien guards converging like ants on a picnic. Taran could feel the weight of the universe pressing down, but she pushed onward, refusing to let it crush her. The resistance team burst through the doors, feet pounding against the metal floor as they raced back to their hideout. Behind them, chaos erupted as the aliens scrambled to respond. "Good distraction," Nod said between gasps, casting a quick glance over his shoulder. "We should do it more often. Next time you're the bait," Riggs shot back, his sarcasm cutting through the panic. They reached the safety of their hideout, hearts still racing and adrenaline pumping through their veins. Taran allowed herself a moment of relief, the weight of their successful rescue settling over her like a warm blanket. They'd done it. Against the odds, they'd pulled it off. But even as they regrouped, a nagging sense of foreboding lingered at the edges of her mind. The universe had a way of balancing the scales, and Taran couldn't shake the feeling that they were due for a reckoning. The aliens wouldn't let this go unanswered, and the final showdown loomed on the horizon like a storm waiting to break. For now, though, they'd won a small victory, and Taran intended to savor it. They'd regroup, plan their next move, and prepare for the battle ahead. Ecliptica wasn't free yet, but they were closer than ever. And as she looked around at her team, battered but not broken, Taran felt a spark of hope ignite within her, a defiant flame against the encroaching darkness. The universe might be indifferent, but humans were anything but predictable. "Let's get to work," Taran said, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "We've got a universe to piss off." Taran stood at the edge of their hideout, staring into the grim expanse of Ecliptica with all the enthusiasm of a cat contemplating a swim. It was a cosmic back alley, all right, with the distinct aroma of despair and burnt coffee that seemed to cling to the rusting bulkheads. But it was home, and like any bad roommate, it was a devil she knew. The alien overseers hadn't wasted time. Their surveillance drones buzzed around like particularly paranoid wasps, and the patrols had doubled. Doubled. As if the first batch wasn't already a migraine with too many legs. It was almost flattering, really, how much fuss they made about one little breakout. "Got a plan, boss?" Riggs asked, sidling up to her with all the grace of an oil spill. His hands were black with engine grease, a permanent accessory that matched his 5 o'clock shadow. "Do I ever?" Taran shot back with a grin. "But we're going to wing it, make it up as we go. Seems to piss them off, and that's always a bonus." Riggs chuckled, a sound like gravel in a blender. "Alien tech can't handle human stupidity." "Huh, exactly," Taran replied, glancing over to where Nod was fiddling with a jury-rigged control panel. "Nod, you got that thing singing yet?" Nod didn't bother looking up, his focus entirely on the rat's nest of wires. "Give me another minute. This thing's older than Fletch's optimism, but I'll make it dance." Janice appeared, her expression a mix of skepticism and mild amusement. "So, we're banking on confusing them with randomness. Seems more like a typical Friday night, more or less," Taran admitted. "We throw a wrench into their systems, cause a little chaos, and hope they don't figure out what hit them until it's too late." "Love it," Janice said dryly. "We're betting the farm on a glitch in the matrix." The plan, such as it was, hinged on human unpredictability, something aliens couldn't grasp if they wrote a 1,000-page report on it, which they probably would. They were all about efficiency and predictability, two things Ecliptica's motley crew couldn't do if their lives depended on it, which, coincidentally, they did. As the team prepped for their night's escapade, Taran couldn't help but marvel at the odd collection of rebels around her. If the universe had a sense of humor, she was pretty sure they were the punchline. A ragtag bunch, held together by duct tape, sarcasm, and a shared hatred of their multi-limbed overlords. "All right," Taran called out, clapping her hands for attention. "Tonight's the night. We hit them hard, hit them fast, and hope to whatever cosmic deities listening that we make it out alive. Always a confidence boost, Riggs muttered, earning a smirk from Janice. Their objective, the alien control hub, a fortress of blinking lights and hums, the kind of place that looked like a migraine in architectural form. The Omega node was still a wild hypothesis at best, but the myth said it was hidden there, amidst wires and circuits designed to oppress rather than enlighten. "Let's move," Taran ordered, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline as they filed out of the hideout. They were shadows in the dim corridors, slipping through the station with all the grace of a drunken lizard. They reached the outskirts of the alien compound, a sprawling mass of alien architecture that seemed to radiate disdain for anything resembling human interference. Taran glanced at Nod, who was clutching a makeshift remote like it was the Holy Grail. "Time to work your magic, Nod," she whispered. Nod nodded, an act that always amused her more than it should, and flipped a switch. The jury-rigged control panel hummed to life with a series of disconcerting clicks and beeps, a symphony of chaos ready to unleash hell. Light flickered erratically across the alien compound, a telltale sign that Nod's handiwork was already making itself known. Alarms blared, lights flashed, and somewhere deep within, systems were throwing digital tantrums. "Welp, there goes the neighborhood," Riggs commented, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Let's hope they're as confused as they sound," Taran said, leading the charge toward the control hub. Inside, the hub was a maze of corridors and doors, all identical in their cold, utilitarian design. Taran's pulse quickened as they navigated the labyrinthine passages, each step a gamble against detection. Voices echoed ahead, a pair of alien guards chattering in the irritatingly melodic clicks of their language. The translation unit struggled to keep up, rendering their conversation into a surreal mix of gibberish and bad poetry. "Better than nothing," Janice muttered, peeking around the corner. "Two guards. We distract or take them out, both," Taran decided. "Janice, you create a diversion." "Riggs, you and Nod take them down." Janice nodded, tossing a small, spherical device, one of her beloved toys, down the hall. It rolled noiselessly, stopping short of the guards before emitting a loud, obnoxious siren that could have woken the dead. The guards turned, their many eyes widening in confusion. Riggs and Nod were on them in an instant, dispatching the aliens with a practiced efficiency that was both impressive and slightly alarming. With the path cleared, they pressed on, reaching the control room's entrance. Taran's heart thudded in her chest as she punched in the codes they'd stolen, praying the universe wasn't feeling fickle today. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a room that was more blinking lights and screens than actual space. The Omega node, if it existed, was somewhere in this mess, buried under layers of alien tech and bureaucracy. "Spread out," Taran instructed, scanning the room for anything that matched the mythical descriptions. "We've got minutes if we're lucky." The team moved with frantic precision, searching for a needle in a digital haystack. Every screen and console held the potential to be their salvation or their doom, and the clock was ticking with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "Got something," Nod called, waving them over to a panel marked with alien runes that translated to something like "Do not touch under penalty of death," which, of course, meant it was exactly what they were looking for. Taran joined him, eyes narrowing at the screen that displayed more data than she'd seen in her entire life. "Think it's the Omega node?" Riggs asked, skepticism lacing his voice. "It's either that or the aliens' version of a tax return," Nod replied, fingers dancing over the controls with a confidence that bordered on madness. The system hummed to life, screens flickering as Nod worked his magic. Alarms blared anew, the room bathed in the angry red glow of emergency lights. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster," Janice urged, casting nervous glances at the door. "Almost there," Nod promised, his focus unwavering despite the chaos erupting around them. The moment stretched, tension coiling tight enough to snap. Taran held her breath, willing the universe to cut them a break just this once. Then with a triumphant beep the system complied. The lights flickered, the alarms silenced, and the oppressive hum of alien tech faded into an eerie quiet. "Did it work?" Taran asked, barely daring to hope. Nod gave a lopsided grin. "We've got a shutdown, temporarily at least. Enough to screw them over for a bit." A cheer went up from the team, a ragged, disbelieving sound that was more relief than triumph. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd pulled the rug out from under their alien overlords. "Time to bail," Taran said, her voice cutting through the jubilation. "This isn't over yet." They fled the control room, leaving behind a trail of chaos and confusion that was sure to leave the aliens spinning. The compound was in disarray, guards scrambling to contain the unexpected shutdown as the humans made their escape. Back in the relative safety of the hideout, Taran allowed herself a moment to breathe, the enormity of their victory settling in. "Well," she said, looking around at her team, "that was fun. Let's never do it again." "Agreed," Riggs replied, sinking into a chair with a groan. Nod shot her a grin, his eyes bright with mischief. "Come on, you know you love it," Taran chuckled, shaking her head. "I love pissing them off. This was just stupid, but it was a necessary stupidity, a calculated chaos that the aliens couldn't predict or control. Humans were a wild card, and they'd just proven that unpredictability could be their greatest weapon. As the team settled in, the weight of their actions pressed heavily on Taran's shoulders. The aliens wouldn't take this lying down. Retaliation was inevitable, and the fight was far from over. But for now, they'd won a crucial battle, and they were a step closer to freedom. The Omega Node, myth or not, had given them a chance to level the playing field. "Get some rest," Taran advised, her own exhaustion creeping in. "We'll need our strength for whatever comes next," and whatever that was, Taran was ready. They'd face the impossible and come out the other side, battered but defiant. The universe might be vast and uncaring, but humans, they were just getting started. With one last glance at her team, Taran felt a strange mix of pride and resolve. They'd take on the universe, one unpredictable, chaotic step at a time. And maybe, just maybe, they'd win. In the dim light of Ecliptica, a spark of hope flickered, unpredictable, unyielding, and very, very human. If you've ever wondered what the aftermath of a victory against a multi-limbed, bureaucratic alien regime feels like, imagine winning a bar brawl only to realize you've broken your hand in the process. Ecliptica was still reeling from the metaphorical punch we'd thrown, and everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Not that any of us wore shoes in the traditional sense. Gravity boots were more the fashion here. Back in the hideout, Taran sat cross-legged, staring at the ceiling like it might start offering life advice. The adrenaline rush had faded, leaving behind a hangover of uncertainty and existential dread, the kind that usually followed a late-night philosophy binge or one too many drinks. The others were scattered around the room, basking in the glory of their monumental stupidity. "Well," Janice said, breaking the silence with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "Now what?" "Now we wait," Taran replied, her voice laced with a tired resignation that could have rivaled a nihilistic guru. "See if the universe decides to kick us in the teeth or hand us a participation trophy. Could be worse," Riggs chimed in, rubbing grease-stained fingers over his forehead. "We could still be in the control room trying to talk our way out of a death penalty. Optimism. Thy name is Riggs," Taran muttered, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. Nod, who'd been lurking by the flickering surveillance relay like a particularly jittery phantom, spoke up. "Controls down, but not out. They'll be back online sooner or later. Then we better get our ducks in a row before they start quacking," Janice replied, arms crossed in what could only be described as an attempt to contain her ever-present skepticism. Taran let out a long breath, her mind ticking over like a clockwork nightmare. "All right, let's focus on what we can control. We need to figure out how the hell to integrate cloning into this mess without turning the city into a soap opera." "Cloning," Riggs said, scratching his head. "Never thought I'd see the day we'd consider making more of ourselves as a strategic advantage. Desperation makes fools of us all," Taran replied dryly. But if we can harness the adaptability of humans with the efficiency the aliens love so much, maybe, just maybe, we won't need to keep pulling stunts like this. A silence fell, the weight of the implications settling like a heavy fog. Cloning wasn't just a technological leap, it was a gamble with stakes higher than a rigged poker game. Meanwhile, the council chamber was buzzing, literally, like a hive of particularly indecisive bees. The councillors were gathered in their usual state of disarray, debating with all the effectiveness of a broken record. Councillor Fletch, looking as vibrant as a week-old salad, was droning on about compromise. We must consider the broader implications of utilizing cloning technology, he wheezed, his voice resembling a deflated balloon. The aliens are sure to retaliate. They already did, Taran pointed out, her tone as sharp as a razor's edge. That's why we're here, picking up the pieces. The alien envoy, a creature with more limbs than a centipede and just as much charisma, clicked its disapproval. The translation unit coughed out a barely coherent statement about stability and predictability. Predictable, Taran scoffed. On this rock, last time I checked, the only predictable thing about Ecliptica is its unpredictability. Nod leaned closer, whispering if they weren't so stiff, I'd almost feel sorry for them. Yeah, Riggs agreed, but this isn't a charity. It's survival. The council's decision was more of a reluctant shrug than a definitive stance. They would explore the potential of cloning, but cautiously, like a cat testing its 9 lives. Back in the hideout, Riggs was tinkering with a datapad that had seen better days. So, what's our next move? Taran rubbed her temples, the beginnings of a stress headache pounding a rhythm behind her eyes. We need to keep the momentum going. If cloning's our ace in the hole, we better make sure it's not a joker, meaning. Janice prompted, eyebrows arched with curiosity. Meaning we need to test it, Taran replied, the weight of the plan settling on her shoulders like an anvil. Safely, discreetly. And pray to whatever cosmic force watches over idiots like us that we don't end up with an army of evil twins. Amen to that, Nod said, raising a mock toast with a mug that suspiciously smelled like jet fuel. As the team huddled around their makeshift strategy table, which was really just a couple of crates and a crudely drawn map, Taran felt a strange mixture of hope and dread. They were playing a dangerous game with uncertain rules, but at least the pieces were starting to line up. We've got one shot at this, Taran told them, her voice carrying the weight of their collective fate. Let's not cock it up. Encouraging as ever, Janice quipped, though her smile took the edge off her words. The makeshift plan was simple but absurdly risky, just like everything else they'd attempted lately. They'd test the cloning tech in a controlled environment, using genetic samples from willing volunteers. If successful, they'd have a new weapon against their alien overlords. Time frame? Riggs asked, his fingers tapping out a restless beat. Soon as we can, Taran replied, determination hardening her tone. The longer we wait, the more likely the aliens are to regain their footing. Great, Nod said, sarcasm dripping from his words like oil from a leaky engine. No pressure. It was a race against time, against looming disasters both alien and human-made. But if they could pull it off, they'd have a fighting chance, or at least a better one than they did playing solo against an alien deck stacked against them. The days passed in a blur of activity and tension. Ecliptica buzzed with the kind of nervous energy usually reserved for the moment before a storm breaks. The city was beginning to change, slowly, awkwardly, like a toddler taking its first steps. Talk of cloning was everywhere, whispered in back alleys and shouted over the din of crowded marketplaces. There was hope mingled with the fear, a belief that maybe, just maybe, they could wrest some measure of control over their own destinies. Back in the hideout, the team worked tirelessly. Riggs handled the tech, his grease-streaked hands a testament to his dedication. Nod coordinated with the council, navigating the labyrinthine politics with the skill of a seasoned diplomat. Janice kept spirits up, her dry wit a lifeline in the sea of stress. Taran, as always, was the linchpin, the decision-maker, the one who had to balance ambition with caution, hope with reality. It was an exhausting role, but one she wore with surprising ease, even if it felt like a millstone more often than not. "Ready for the test?" Riggs asked, his voice tight with apprehension. "About as ready as we'll ever be," Taran replied, staring at the sterile lab they'd cobbled together from salvaged parts in sheer desperation. "Famous last words," Janice muttered, though her grin belied the gravity of her statement. The test was set to take place in a secluded lab, far from prying eyes and curious ears. If it worked, it would be a game changer. If not, well, they'd cross that bridge if it crumbled beneath them. As they prepared, Taran couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come, and how far they still had to go. The victory against the aliens was a start, but it wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. The day of the test dawned with all the subtlety of a supernova. Heartbeats echoed like war drums, anticipation a heady mix of dread and excitement. Failure loomed large, but so did potential. For once, the scales were balanced, and it was up to them to tip them in humanity's favor. As the process began, Taran held her breath. The lab was filled with a tense silence, broken only by the beeping of monitors and the soft whir of machines. It was like watching the birth of a new era, messy and unpredictable, but undeniably full of promise. Minutes stretched into eternity, but then success. A perfect clone, fully formed and functional, stood before them. It was both awe-inspiring and terrifying, the embodiment of everything they'd worked for. "Holy shit," Riggs breathed, his voice a mixture of disbelief and triumph. "We did it," Nod whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Taran cautioned, though her own heart swelled with pride. This is just the beginning. The implications were staggering. With cloning, they could level the playing field, create a society that was resilient, adaptive, unpredictable in the best ways. It was a chance to forge a future on their own terms, free from alien oppression. Of course, it wasn't without risks. There were ethical concerns, potential fallout, the chance that they'd unleash something they couldn't control. But for once, the scales seemed to favor them, and that was a rare enough occurrence to celebrate. Ecliptica, for its part, was ready. The city was resilient, as battered and stubborn as its inhabitants. With new policies in place, they began the hard work of rebuilding, embracing cloning as a tool for survival and progress. The aliens wouldn't be pleased, but then they didn't need to be. The humans of Ecliptica were carving out their own destiny, one unpredictable, chaotic step at a time. As Taran stood on the precipice of this new chapter, she felt a strange sense of calm. They'd done the impossible, stared down adversity, and come out the other side. And while the road ahead was fraught with challenges, they were ready to face them. In the end, maybe the universe didn't care, but they did. They'd proven that against all odds, humanity could adapt, survive, and even thrive in the most hostile of circumstances. And that, Taran thought with a wry grin, was worth all the chaos in the world.